Thank you both very much for being with us. I think Stuart has already alluded to this, the issue of pharmacy wholesaling being a low margin business. Is it really? Tell us more.
Well, absolutely. Look, it's a tough business. I think we operate in single packs. It's not like, I suppose, grocery where you're delivering pallets and you're pushing out pallets. We deliver a single pack, so margins of error are very, very small. And I suppose we're caught in the middle between the manufacturer and the pharmacy or the hospital. So we're sort of the meat in the sandwich as such, and we're operating 24/7. We provide a fantastic service, but I think it's probably an undervalued service as well in the context of the healthcare infrastructure in the state. That'll be my sort of view on it. But it's very tight. Huge amount of working capital, huge amount of stock, and you take all the risk then around all of that. I suppose that'd be the big call-outs for me, Matt.
How can you increase scale in a market of a small size like Ireland?
So in Ireland, you really can't. It's a zero-sum game, is what you would describe it. So there's two suppliers in the market. Unlikely that there'll be a third. So this is a case where we sit on stage here and we knock chunks out of one another all day, every day, if you like, out on trade. So you're not going to grow. But what Phoenix are doing is they're buying into markets that they don't have a presence in. So they bought into Ireland where they don't have a presence. They bought into Belgium. They didn't have one. They bought into Slovenia in this case. They bought into Italy where they didn't. So they're buying into markets where they don't have a presence.
But then, Dermot, what about the issue of being a price taker effectively? Because if your costs are going up, what sort of negotiations are going on with the HSE, Department of Health, in relation to increased prices? Or are you going to be stuck with long-term contracts on pricing?
Very little. It's probably, I think the wholesale sector hasn't had a strong enough voice historically. I think when you look at what goes on in the sector, you've on the branded product, you've the IFA agreement. Essentially, every year there's a new IFA agreement. We take a hit because we are a price taker. So if the trade price falls, the percentage that we operate, the cash margin per pack falls, as Paul said. So you look at reference pricing, we're on a fixed fee per pack on all of the generics. And then in to be honest with you, in categories like OTC, we're probably moving the box below cost. But volume is so important to us because our fixed costs are such a high proportion of the total cost. So you end up, I suppose, you're as Paul said, you're trying to do other things around the edges. We've a very strong consumer business. We've a very good unlicensed medicines business, and they're probably over indexing in terms of the overall business. But it is something that I think, we come together occasionally to engage with the HSE in terms of the Pharmaceutical Distributors Federation. And it's something myself and Paul would say we don't really have a strong voice. The IFA agreement makes no allowance for the route to market, essentially, which is the two wholesalers. And there's a reason there's only two wholesalers left. It is such a tight business.
And are your new owners committed to Ireland as far as you're concerned?
So they buy and hold. So I've looked at their history, right? They don't buy markets and then sell and exit. So they buy and hold. That is their position. So hopefully that continues. It's a long-term bet, right? Their view is that having scale and wins out in the long term. But I would say in the Irish context, the model today is broken. And in a single word, it's broken. It's no longer fit for purpose. I don't know how it's going to change. But if I look at my parent company, my previous parent company, saying I need investment to invest in the Irish supply chain sector, you sit around the table, they say, I've X amount of capital to deploy into Europe. You raise your hand and say, I need money for my infrastructure. It's very quickly, well, there's no return in Ireland. We're going to give it to Slovenia, we'll give it to Norway, we'll give it to France, we'll give it to Italy. And that is unsustainable. We're now at a stage whereby you cannot write a CapEx paper to drive a return on investment in the core supply chain business. That is the reality. I don't know if it's
slightly similar within Uniphar. I mean, we IPO'd in July 2019. But so our business is split into three divisions. I look after one of those divisions. But when you sit down as a management team within Uniphar, you're competing for capital with other parts of the business. So Group CEO will say, well, why will I give you 60 million for a new distribution centre or a new robotic pick to improve your efficiency or your accuracy of your pick, when he can put 60 million quid into the States or into Europe, into a different part of the group. So it is a concern that, you know, at some point the investment, you know, may not be there to continue to provide
And what
the service
happens
that
then?
we did. I don't know. I think that Stuart mentioned the public service obligation. I think there is an onus on the state maybe to engage more with the sector to make sure that that, you know, the service levels are maintained and that the patient is ultimately provided for.
But the public perception and the political perception is the state is still paying too much for the drugs that it dispenses, so the wholesalers are getting too much money. They want to reduce the prices rather than give you more.
No, there's an understanding that the wholesaler is not being paid too much money. That's the understanding there. The issue is there's no understanding of what the solution is to fix it. From my perspective is the current pricing model and structure where the trade price is agreed between the manufacturer and the state. We, as the supply chain partner, are not even in the room. We sit outside at the end of phones, just like retail pharmacy, waiting for the nod to find out what the impact is and what the price reductions are. It is crippling our sector. It has crippled it based on 10 years of continuous and iterative price reductions. It has crippled the sector.
I'll give you an example. The early stages of COVID, Paul called me and said, we need to do something in case. You know, we have an outbreak of COVID within our two key distribution sites, which actually are only a couple of kilometres from each other out in City West. So we started to engage with the HSC, and we went around literally knocking on doors for 2 or 3 weeks until we found someone who would listen. But that's the level, like there is a complete lack of knowledge within the wider healthcare system of what we do. And we were really concerned that we wouldn't be able to keep our shifts moving, keep our product moving. Because of COVID.
There's a lack of understanding where we buy from 250 manufacturers, right? So there's 250 manufacturers supplying into the market, going through 2 supply chain partners and out to 1,900 retailers. There's a sheer lack of understanding that this, you could call it a bottleneck or a critical infrastructure.
I was going to say funnel.
Yeah, it's funnel, but basically that's what's happening. It's coming down, and these are very complicated businesses. You're talking about stocking 13,000 products, supplying your customers 11 times a week, all kinds of planning algorithms to make sure that it's managed. And there's a complete lack of understanding that if one of these 2 pipes gets clogged, the other pipe cannot fulfill. Simple as that. That is not understood.
You know, United Drug are my biggest customer, and I'm Paul's biggest customer because the way pre-wholesale and the bulk product comes in from Europe, from the manufacturers, we bulk store it, and then he sells to me, and then I distribute to my customer base, and likewise. So there's this inter-reliance, I think that's that's totally missed as well. That, you know, if Paul went down for some reason in the morning, he would bring me down ultimately, and ultimately I think patients would die ultimately if you can't get the product, or you can't get at the product because of the way we're set up, the automation, the robotics, the algorithms, as you said. So there's this huge interreliance as well between both players.
So basically, I'm a process engineer by background. That's what I do. If you looked at this as a process, 250 coming into 2, going out, you say that's a bottleneck. And you say, I need resilience to make sure that this bottleneck or critical piece doesn't clog. The reality is, I will not get the investment from my parent company to make that bigger, you know, to accommodate if one or the other went down. And neither will Dermot, because there's no return on that investment.
What I'm going to do is, I had intended waiting to ask questions at the end of the session, but given that there's a number of elements to this, would anyone like to contribute from the floor at this point on what we've just heard to date? Do I have to give you whiskey first to ask questions?
Or the promise of whiskey.
Yeah, very good. Dara.
Thanks, Dan.
Sorry.
That's very insightful. Yeah, thank you. That's very, very insightful. Is there a model of what you do somewhere in the world, either in Europe or globally, that you think would be a good fix for what we have here for the problems you've identified?
So in Australia, as an example, I've seen where there are remote regions or areas in Australia where the cost to serve doesn't justify serving, let's say, the rural population, and the governments or the state do subventions to support it. So that's one question I have, is there an interest from the state to support it, because remember, the price of the medicine is agreed between the state and the manufacturer. We cannot put through price increases. Even though I've looked at it and said, in theory I could, but it would cause anarchy in the system, because now, from a reimbursement perspective, it wouldn't be aligned. But that's what I'm saying, the model needs to change. If it doesn't change, what's going to happen is we're going to have two suppliers basically saying, you know, we can invest elsewhere, but as for investing into Ireland, it's not going to happen. And you'll get through 1, 2, 3 years. The thing is, these things don't hit the radar until something happens, right? And when something happens, and we saw when COVID hit, our volumes ramped up, our staff were 24/7. I even used the analogy on St. Patrick's Day, my daughter was 21. Guess where I was? At work. Where was Dermot? We were work 24/7. And yet, the service and feedback we got, we weren't where we should be. We know that. But I'd love to be able to invest to make that pipe bigger, to protect all of us. But the state needs to step in and help.
Dermot, do you have a response to that?
Just on that, Dara, I think the Swiss model as well seems to be a much more equitable model in terms of the wholesalers do get a piece from the government, and they are welded into the agreements with manufacturers that the wholesalers have to be provided for. So there seems to be a much more sustainable model in Switzerland, would be the one that sticks out.
And Switzerland, what they do is they basically get all the stakeholders, the state, retail pharmacy, supply chain partners, all sit in a room and they say, okay, how do we make this process efficient from beginning to end, including claims and reimbursement? So they have a very adult approach where they say, let's all sit in a room and figure it out. We never sit in a room collectively with the state. Supply chain partners, retail pharmacy, etc. We don't. It's each one is, you know, in isolation or treated separately. But that's how the Swiss model works, because they sat in and said, how do we make it as efficient from beginning to end, and how do we support the infrastructure from manufacturer right through to the patient? That would be a beautiful thing to do.
Any more questions on the floor on this particular point? Okay, if there isn't, I'll press on to the next part of this discussion I want to have. Talk to me about the costs issues that you're having at present. And particularly labour, I think, is going to be a big part of this morning's discussion. Have you enough people to do the work that you need to do, and can you afford them?
We've 6 distribution centres. Probably 70% of our volume comes from City West, and then we have another facility in Limerick. So we're very reliant on City West. Obviously, it's within Dublin, so the cost of living in Dublin, housing, all that is you know, I think our people are no different. They're all impacted by that. What we've seen sort of since COVID is we've seen probably quite a lot of turnover within warehouse operators, that type of thing. They've moved into different industry. Van drivers have moved out of the industry. They've moved into other industries. So it is a challenge. I think it's, you know, we've had to adapt. We've had to be inventive. We've had to obviously increase rates, increase bonuses, other types of benefits. So, you know, you've got the energy piece on the distribution side, and you've got, well, we've probably about 100 vans on the road today, 100 trucks on the road, so you've got the fuel impact of that. So, you know, it's been a tough sort of 18 months, and the outlook probably isn't great either.
It's going to get tougher, isn't it?
It's going to get tougher, yes. So, you know, we're just, you know, it's only going one way at the moment, and we've introduced certain things that we've had to do, but it's probably only at around the margins. Really, it doesn't cover everything. We've tried to soak up, I suppose, as much of the cost as we could over the last 12 months.
In what way when you say soak it up?
Well, we've taken the hit. We've obviously got, on one side we've got a new IFA agreement, a new 4-year agreement that's impacted us. I'm sure you're the same. And then on the other side, our cost has gone up. So we've got squeezed. We've absorbed a lot of the costs, but we've just put through a price increase there in November this month, because we've just had to, and we'd probably have to review it again in the new year to see where we are. But like it is tough to keep the service levels and that side of it up as well. But I think that the people side is a constant challenge.
Your experience?
Yeah, so if you did a little Pareto chart, our top 3 costs are staff is number 1, transport is 2, and energy is 3. All 3 of them have gone, you know, have increased. We've also put in order to maintain service over the Christmas trading period, we've put in an extra incentive to our warehouse operatives to make sure that we can get through the Christmas trading period. Well, it's just like Dermot, look, it's the same in retail pharmacy, right? The reality is our costs are going up. The difficulty we have is we can't put through a price increase. Broadly speaking, we can't. So that's the challenge we have. So up the line, you know, my new parents are basically saying, what can you do? Can you take costs out? We have ravaged our business over the past 10 to 11 years through continuous improvement, Lean Six Sigma, all kinds of programs taking cost out iteratively. So there's no underbelly left in our business to take cost out further. So it's, at the moment, we're a bit like Dermot, we're just taking it. It's not a pretty year. This will not be financially, this will not be a good year for the business.
Again, do we have any questions from the audience in relation to this? Even any expressions of sympathy?
Retail pharmacy is similarly under pressure, so we're not looking for sympathy.
Yeah, that's
Killing,
yeah. Sorry, yes.
Might service level have to drop?
I don't know. It's definitely something that has to be considered. You know, we're 24/7 business, 11 deliveries a week into most retail pharmacies. You're the same. We're 2-3 times a day into hospital. I think there's probably a better way of doing it, but it would need huge engagement between all parts of the industry to change it. I mean, if we're just turning a month end tonight, right? So our volume will hit peak tonight, tomorrow night, Friday night, and then it sort of comes down a bell curve for the rest of the month. Then it starts to peak back up. It'd be lovely to be able to level load that. Get a bit more capacity out of the vans. You know, use the existing infrastructure a bit better. But we wait for your orders. We don't push. We don't suggest. That needs a lot of work. It needs a lot of digital investment. It needs AI. It needs a lot of stuff maybe to make it work. That'd be the utopian sort of way that we would see it operating.
Is there a danger that you could make a lot of the investment in the technology, digitalisation, and find that your customers don't, and you can't actually interact with them?
And that's back to, justifying the investment from a group point of perspective.
I answered it in a similar manner. The reality is retail pharmacy and hospitals are our customers, right? So change in service is something that it's the last thing in your mind. And retail pharmacy is built around the number of deliveries and a way of working. They manage their stock holdings as a result. I think the adult thing is that the state needs to meet with us to figure out and say, how do we make the model work? They have single-handedly, through price reductions, eroded the profitability, and we're not in the room. So I'd say in the first instance, sitting in the room together would help. And secondly, there are things you could do working together, but they're not going to change the headline. They're not, you'll make 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% increments, but you're not going to change the story, which is the model is currently broken.
Have you approached the department and the HSC and requested, and what sort of response have you had?
We've written, so during COVID, we wrote on a number of occasions. We basically got we got a response that we received your letter, but that's it. And equally, it's very difficult to know who or what department you should be engaging with. It's very hard to figure that out.
Yeah.
Why, you say it's not necessarily a Department of Health issue, is it?
Well, it's hard to know who in the Department of Health are, is it the regulator on the one hand, the safe and secure supply of medicines, the regulator has a role, the regulator, so actually it's with the Department of Health. The Department of Health will pass you on to the HSE. It's very hard to figure out who the right individual it is to engage with. So we're working on that at the moment. But we've tried this, I would say, 4, 5, 6 times easily. And it's probably the same with retail pharmacy. It's very hard to know who are the decision makers.
Anyone else want to come in on this? Yes, over there.
Hi, just wondering, in terms of your reimbursement versus your cost, is there a level of medicines being supplied to pharmacy that are above reimbursement at cost for the pharmacy? So, or are you capable of putting your costs slightly higher than the reimbursement from the?
So, in simple terms, we buy a trade less 15. Okay, the majority of the 15 has been passed back to retail pharmacy over the years, and that made sense at a point in time. What has actually happened is, as costs have increased, And then as the price of the medicine has reduced, it has created a squeeze in our sector. So when you meet with the state, they'll say, well, actually, it's not our fault that you've passed the majority of the margin across to the retailer. But as I look out to this room, I don't think anyone's going to be happy if we go and say, actually, we're going to reduce the level of rebates or discounts back out into retail pharmacy. So we're caught in this conundrum where I'd love to see us almost work together to say that the model between the manufacturer and the patient is no longer fit for purpose, be it a pharmacy contract or the model within the supply chain. But it's no longer fit for purpose.
If you go back 2010, 2011, probably before the patent cliff, really, we were probably carrying 4,000 or 5,000 product lines. That's now 12,000, 13,000. So every time something comes off patent, you might have 3 presentations of the branded product, 10 milligram, 20 milligram, 50 milligram, whatever. What you get when genericization is you get maybe 8 manufacturers then with 3 presentations. So now the number of SKUs, the number of stock holding positions you have to carry has exponentially grown. But actually, because it's genericized, the margin per pack is falling to almost a break-even point. So, if you look at what's happened and the value that's been taken out of the sector over the last 10 years, we've been on the receiving end of that every time. In terms of the margin per pack, but also the complexity of managing the stock and the tail of stock we now carry is absolutely massive.
So what percentage of your stock is now generic? Because there would have been a big push after the crash 12 years ago or so, and at this stage there was a major push, say, to move to generic drugs. So how much of a change was there?
I don't know the exact numbers, but I can answer slightly differently. So of the total margin on wholesale, because I looked at it last night, 6% of the margin coming through is actually through the generic one. So that's what's of value to me. The trade price or the selling price is now irrelevant. It's the absolute margin. That's where it's coming through. I think to answer that question slightly differently, we could unilaterally go and change rebates out to retailers and cause chaos or put up the price. There's nothing that says we can't increase the price of a medicine, but it would cause anarchy in the reimbursement because nothing would match. Okay, but there's nothing that says that I can't get up tomorrow and increase the price. I can do that, but it would cause absolutely consternation. What needs to happen is let's get in a room and figure out what's a fair and equitable way of managing between the manufacturer and the retailer. Because the manufacturers are negotiating directly with the state, and we, as in retail pharmacy or supply chain partners, are not in the room, and it's having a detrimental impact on our businesses. So I don't know if you probably get this, Matt, but basically the price of the medicine is agreed between the state and the manufacturer. We're not even in the room.
Lady down there, we got a microphone to you.
Hi, Dermot and Paul, Claire Excel here from the ABU. Question on your public service obligations and your ability to buy products from manufacturers. Because what we see now is sometimes both of you don't have it in stock. So maybe just to understand, both the line wholesalers we're seeing now don't have full lines, or what your thoughts on that are.
Well, I'm 10 years in this industry, and I've never seen supply as bad as it is at the moment. So, I see manufacturers, their own supply chains under pressure. So, sometimes they don't even know when they're out of stock themselves. We're the first to know, actually. And then that places, huge issues for us in terms of if something's out of stock, then the next best and the next alternative. So there's a run on a set of products and trying to keep up with that, keep your service levels. But I think there is a sort of a direct-to-pharmacy model here, especially around the high techs, where products are listed exclusively with one wholesaler or the other. I think that creates a lot of complexity. It creates a lot of management on our side, a lot of additional cost to provide that. So in some ways, I'd nearly prefer it if it was available from both wholesalers. That might be controversial, but I just think it's you're looking after your own customers in a better way, because if something's out of stock and it comes back in and Paul is the pre-wholesaler for that molecule, Paul will have it first. So I have to wait 3 or 4 days for it to be built into the delivery schedule into me. I've got to get it in through the back door, get it into my stock location, get it picked. So, but my customers think, that our service level is inferior to Paul's, but Paul has it in his bulk storage. So it creates a lot of complexity. It creates an awful lot of calls to call centres from retail pharmacy, from hospitals, and that's a cost that we absorb as well, I suppose. But it's but I think the manufacturer supply chain piece is very fragile as well. I think certainly in the areas of generics, I've never seen OTC as bad as it has been. We had a lot of high-profile stuff around HRT during the summer, but I think you've looked at post-COVID API manufacture in China, India, the European Union now trying to get some of that brought back into Europe. So there's another layer of complexity from the manufacturer's perspective as well, which.
Yeah, just to build on it, so it's a great question, right? So the public service obligation is a term that's used where wholesalers have to do all within their power to make products available to the market, okay? So everyone gets that. So the regulator, when they come in to audit us, we check to make sure that we've algorithms and allocations and ways of working to make sure that we've been equitable in how we've provided drugs. On the flip side, they're allowing manufacturers to put in place soulless arrangements or single supplier direct to pharmacy models. It would make more sense to me to have all products available to both wholesalers. It would provide a better service. It would make retail pharmacy less complicated. We could put it on our standard infrastructure and supply 11 times a week. You could get pack replacement the same as normal. I'd welcome that. I think that makes very good sense. But the public service obligation, it's used to manage us during audit times or if there's shortages in the market, but it's not used all the time, because if it was used all the time, we'd have the full range of all medicines, including high-tech or specialty products.
Presumably the public service obligation also means that even though it's a higher cost to you, you have to deliver to Mayo, to Kerry, to Donegal, all these places.
Yeah, you look at the population, the demographics, the East Coast, the sort of weighting towards the East Coast, that Dublin commuter belt. You could probably make the argument if you ran the numbers that anything west of Portlaoise we're probably losing money on when you analyse it. I don't know. I've never done it.
So
but
I've done it. If you took Leinster, where you have 80% of the population where you could supply straight from Leinster, and ignore the rest of the country, you would make more profit. It's a very, it's not a nice thing to say, but if you did the mathematics of it, that's what it says. But you wouldn't do that, right? But that's the reality. And I'm conscious that this is being recorded, right? But that's the mathematics.
And your new owners won't require you to.
But going back to the Swiss model, right? Yeah. That's how the Swiss model came about, is that because of the geographics of the country and the terrain, there was pockets where it wasn't financially viable. So they sat in a room and said that we understand to go to X, Y, and Z is loss making, but in aggregate, this is the model we want, and that's what the suppliers do. So, that's why I think adult conversations are very helpful. At the moment, it's very hard to engage, to have an open discussion.
Just on the issue of a lack of supply of medicines, I think that surprises the public at times as well, because the perception has developed that many of them are made in Ireland. So how can something that's made in Ireland be difficult to source? Don't we have first shot at it?
So just that the vast majority of active ingredient of products, some of it might be produced in Ireland, but it leaves the country to get packaged, and then it comes back in again and goes through our pre-wholesale and wholesale businesses. So
that doesn't seem very efficient.
Well, you can't package it in Ireland, right? There aren't packages. But what has happened is, during Brexit, we all worked together, as in the state, supply chain part of manufacturers, to build a robust way of working to protect the country from Brexit. A number of manufacturers changed their route to market. They didn't come through the land bridges as UK. But what is happening now, and this is in the last 12 months or 18 months, what we call agent can't supply, is a manufacturer can't supply. If you take 18 months ago, for every 100 packs of medicines I ordered, we would typically have got between 85 and 91%. That was the run rate. Last month, for every 100 packs we ordered, we got 71. So that basically says something is happening. And I don't think you have to be a genius to figure out that as the price of medicines have reduced with the state, and the cost to supply Ireland Inc. with medicines, there's definitely been a change in mindset about producing and packaging product for the Irish market.
We're a very small market. I think what you're seeing is manufacturers, teams on the ground in Ireland getting smaller. A lot of the commercial decisions, a lot of the supply chain decisions are made outside of Ireland. And commercially, I think manufacturers are looking at the market going, do you know what, we can make more money elsewhere, win a tender in another market, we're guaranteed volume, and we can manufacture to that volume. And I think Ireland is on the periphery, very small market, and I think that's what we're seeing.
Does that mean essential products could become unavailable to us?
Well, if you take last month, for every 100 products we ordered, we got 71.
Yeah, that's happening now.
Of units, I'm talking about unit
I
pack.
think, you know,
And on the flip side, if you look at high-tech or specialty products, which are the expensive medicines, guess what? There's availability. So it's something is and has changed in the last 18 months. And our outbound service out to our customers is 99.3%. But the issue for the retail community is the sense is, we're dropping the ball, we're making mistakes. We're using the same algorithms, the same processes, the same staff. This is an inbound supply into Ireland issue.
You'd have to wonder, there's been a huge amount of value taken out with reference pricing on the generics. It's what we've seen in the OTC recently, but has the price maybe gone too far for a small market, and the supply isn't protected as part of that price piece? So I think somewhere post-COVID and I think manufacturers are waking up to the fact that actually, we can't, we don't want to supply a small market like Ireland. I think those decisions
I suppose the
are
thing
being
to remember
made.
is during Brexit, when there was lots of change going on, lots of manufacturers changing their route to market, bypassing the UK, carrying extra bulk stock, etc. We managed through all of that. We managed through the first 6-9 months of COVID. There's a change after.
I think we were very lucky, Paul. There was a huge amount of product in the market. Your pre-wholesale business, my pre-wholesale business. Brexit had 2 or 3 delays. Manufacturers were ready; they had stock in position, and then COVID came. So we were very lucky that we had a buffer of stock in the market, and I think that buffer is gone now. And I think you're starting to see the reality sort of.
Then how do you choose on the allocation if you have a shortfall of product?
You're rationing.
You're rationing. It is rationing. There's a certain number of packs available per store. It's not ideal. We have 5 to 6 people permanently sitting upstairs just rationing product. There's 200, 250 products on allocation at the moment. Limited supply. The supply is being managed. It's a headache. Coupled with that, then when the regulator comes in to audit, they want to audit all your files, look at all the requests for product, who you supplied, who you didn't supply. It's a big issue for the regulator. It's a big issue. They audit us against it. I'm sure there's a retailer in the room that'll think it's fair and appropriate, but we're caught in this middle sector where we're rationing the product.
Anyone else want to come in? Gentleman here at the front. We just get a microphone up to you there. Thank you. Just in the 3rd row there, please. Thank you.
Probably a depressing question, but would IFA set to rumble on for another 3 years, say 3 and a bit?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's a breaking point going to come before then where we have actual proper, cannot supply seriously needed medicines because the price elsewhere in Europe is that arbitrage opportunity for the manufacturers is just so great that the supply doesn't get her?
I suppose if you look at, so I'm a big believer in trends, right? I never look at 1 month in isolation. If you look at the past 12 to 18 months, the trend line for inbound availability of product is on decline. It is a fact. If I showed you the graph, you would say, if that trend doesn't change, so in the last 18 months, it is, and it's typically on what I would call established medicines where you don't necessarily have alternate supplies, but they've reduced down the price. So I'm not going to mention brands or molecules here, but you all know what they are. It's like, it's a problem. It's a real problem. And it's causing chaos for our business. So for example, we've just, to supply 13,000 products, we have a huge amount of automation. 80% of what we pick, we've lots of manual efforts around to make the automation run. Okay, so your goods in, your put away, staging, etc. You design a system to say, I'm going to pick 100 packs or 100 units. So it's set up to pick 100. You're out of stock for 6 weeks. you're receiving 2,000 units. Guess what? The demand from retail pharmacy then is, we want all 2,000 units out immediately. The system isn't designed to be able to cover huge swings, because if you think about it, going back to our earlier part of the conversation, we've designed a really efficient way of picking for consistent volume based on 2 consistent players in the market. It's not designed for feast or famine.
Yeah.
And certainly if you think feast or famine times 13,000 products, you don't have to be a genius to know that that's not possible. So it causes chaos in our business when the out of stocks come back in, and then it's World War III from retailers saying, why can't I have what I wanted? I have patients waiting. It's not practically possible. Now, if I was given money to invest, what would I do? I'd double the number of channels in our automated picking. I would double my capacity, and guess what? I could handle these things. But there's no return. I'm going to invest to still do the same amount. So there's no... it's fascinating when you look at it. It's like someone needs to wake up and understand what's actually happening here.
Dermot, you want to come in?
Yeah,
on
no,
that?
I suppose the IFA agreement covers the branded, and I suppose myself and Paul aren't qualified to talk about the generic piece or the OTC piece, but probably a lot of the noise has come from that side of the supply chain side, from the manufacturers. But certainly the role of unlicensed medicines, our unlicensed medicine, PharmaSource, we've never been busier. We've never been, we've had to look and broaden our own sourcing channels to try and meet the need.
But Paul, you already mentioned that the more expensive medicines, there's no shortage of that because but I know a lot of the new medicines tend to be expensive, but is there also a potential that we may end up with new products not entering the Irish market as soon as they do other markets because the manufacturers think the money isn't going to be made here?
Well, that's a theme that everybody knows about. We're one of the slowest markets to launch new products based on a struggle or a slowness in trying to get the price approved between the state and the manufacturer. So we don't have a role in that, but that's clear, that's common knowledge, that there's a delay in getting new products launched in the Irish market. I think we're like ranked 25th or 30th in Europe. We're well down the tail.
I saw a stat where we've come back over 10 years, back below well below the EU average now, and some Eastern European countries have jumped ahead of us in the pace and the speed at which we adopt new medicines. So we definitely have fallen behind.
Do we have more questions on the floor on this? If we don't, I'd like to ask both of you as well as to what you see as being the future of pharmacy, the future for your various customers. Dermot.
Well, I think it's a massive role to play. I think, from an infrastructure point of view, from a primary healthcare infrastructure point of view, I think Stuart touched on it earlier, there's probably more that the sector can do. I think digital is going to be a big part of the future.
In what way? E-dispensing?
I think that's probably going to come over the next 5-6 years, absolutely. But I don't see bricks and mortar becoming completely obsolete. If you look at penetration across Europe in e-prescribing, it's still very, very low, Matt. And I think that connection with your pharmacist is still massively important. So I think that digital connection with the store, with the pharmacist, how you wrap that up is going to be a big part of the future as well. And I think there's that whole sort of engagement with the patient through, it's a word I don't like, but that omni-channel type of engagement, I think, is going to be where it's going to be at. But I think services, you look to the UK, they've their own challenges, but taking services out of GP surgeries, putting them into pharmacy, paying for things like sore throat services, medicine usage reviews, all that type of stuff. I think there's a lot more that the sector can offer the state from that perspective.
Paul?
Something similar, I would say. If you look at Ireland, right, as a country, you can see where post offices, banks, and closing and pulling out of rural communities. I think pharmacy, the day that happens, it will be devastating for Ireland. So we need to keep the infrastructure that's there. It's a critical infrastructure. I lost my own mother-in-law about 3 months ago. I can tell you, when a family's in need in Ireland at the moment, their local pharmacist is where they go to, because you can't get into your GP, you can't get to your consultant. So it is critical that retail pharmacy is supported into the future. And I hope it happens, but it's a bit like our own sector. As it starts to contract, or should it start to contract, I don't believe the A&E departments, the HSE, the hospitals will be able to cope, because there's a huge amount that's been filtered. Even my own daughter last night, my wife goes to the local pharmacy. Or if there was a local pharmacy to check out for an infection, etc., they'd be going to an A&E or trying to get into a doctor. And that infrastructure isn't there. We also saw during COVID, let's call a spade a spade. It started out where vaccines were going to be done through GPs. That's where it was going in the initial couple of weeks. Very quickly, it was like they had to turn on retail pharmacy, because that's where the vast majority of vaccinations were done, was through retail pharmacy. And retail pharmacy in Ireland is trusted like no other market in Europe. People trust their local pharmacist. And it's not the same. If you compare it to the UK or other markets, just look at the product offering and retail pharmacy in the UK versus Ireland. There is no comparison. This is unique.
And this is relevant to you as wholesalers as well. Do you see potential, though, that people will try and bypass the pharmacist to get delivery of in the post? Or we've seen in America recently as well, and there's a company called Medley which is failing at present in trying to do what you might call a Deliveroo for medicines in home delivery. Do you see the potential for that in Ireland?
I think it's really difficult. I think that type of model only suits a certain part of the market, if you like. So certain volumes that might suit. We've seen in the UK, we've seen in Germany, some of the pure play e-prescribing operators. You've seen Amazon maybe making a bit of a retreat out of pharmacy in the US already. So I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. I think that the engagement with the pharmacist, as Paul has outlined, that connectivity with the patient is priceless. I think that there's always going to be a huge requirement for that.
Okay, we're coming towards the end of this particular part of the proceedings. So have we any further questions from the audience before we finish? Nothing? Really? Yes, thank you, down at the back.
Hi Paul, hi Dermot, Patrick McCormick here from Cara Pharmacy. What's the view of both of you in terms of further vertical integration?
Well, we've been quite active, I suppose, since 2020 when we acquired Hickey's. I think there's probably a balance between sort of being relevant and I think one of the reasons we've made investment in pharmacy, because obviously we're trying to diversify. We've diversified as a group. Uniphar started in the late 60s, early 70s as essentially a buying group, a co-op of pharmacists, and we've divested into medtech and other parts of that sort of healthcare services business. I think retail is no different. We've diversified because of some of the challenges we've talked about here, but also I think being in retail pharmacy makes us understand the retail piece much better. So it makes us much more relevant to our customers on the wholesale side, but also the likes of our symbol offerings with Life Pharmacy, All Care as a franchise. So I think being invested in retail makes that much better. But I think there is a point where you probably can't go beyond for all sorts of competition issues as well. But so I think we've bought Hickey's, we've bought Macaulay's. There's probably not too many more opportunities out there, as I would see it, before we start hitting issues with either competition or competing with our customers as well. So it's just there's a fine balance between that vertical integration and not.
Yeah, I'd say the same. It's when I look across Europe. So I sat on our European leadership team. We're in 14 countries. We were vertically integrated in almost all of them. And the reason for it is that in order to leverage or get better deals from manufacturers to support all your clients or customers, you need to have a retail presence, was number one. And number two is to be relevant in the market. So I can tell you, being really honest, 6 years ago before I had sight of Lloyd's, I wouldn't have understood just the pain that was in retail pharmacy. I'd have heard it, but I've learned a massive amount about that pain and the complexity of retail pharmacy, even going back to reimbursement, the impact of a high-tech hub, all of those things. If I was sitting behind my desk as a supply chain partner only, frankly, I wouldn't hear, I wouldn't understand. So I think it's good for the sector overall.
You've learnt the meaning of empathy, so have you?
I've learned the meaning of empathy, yeah.
Okay, do we have any final questions before I thank our contributors for what has been absolutely fascinating conversation? Paul, Dermot, thank you very much for your